Welcome to Headline Wednesday from Dispatch, U.S. Military History Magazine, developed by trackpads.com. Each week, we take one pivotal moment from United States military history and follow it from the first warning signs to the final outcome. Today, we go to the A Shau Valley in the Vietnam War for the story of the fight for Hamburger Hill. The rain had already soaked through their ponchos when the first helicopter lifts came in over the trees. Rotor blades beat the low clouds into mist and spray as soldiers from the 101st Airborne Division stepped into the jungle below. Ahead of them rose Hill 937, a steep ridge hidden by fog, bamboo, elephant grass, and mud. Somewhere above, North Vietnamese army troops waited in bunkers cut deep into the hillside, protected by logs, earth, and the jungle itself. The first firefights on the lower slopes did not look like the beginning of a famous battle. A squad crossing a stream took automatic fire from a concealed position and dropped into the mud. A machine gun team tried to set up on a small rise, only to find its field of fire blocked by vegetation. Radios crackled as company commanders tried to track scattered contacts, shifting positions, and casualties. The terrain swallowed maps, grid lines, and plans almost as soon as the fight began. Every step upward made the hill feel steeper. Men slipped backward in red mud and pulled each other forward by rifle slings and web gear. Medevac helicopters hovered over small clearings blasted out with explosives, trying to hold steady in rain and wind while wounded soldiers were dragged aboard under fire. The higher the companies climbed, the more deliberate the enemy fire became. The defenders were not simply reacting, they were testing the American strength and their willingness to keep coming. Hill 937 sat along the spine of the A Shau Valley, a long corridor near the Laotian border in South Vietnam's ThuIen province. For years, the valley had served as a route for North Vietnamese units moving men and supplies south under jungle cover. To American commanders, the area was more than another patch of high ground. It was a gateway between the Ho Chi Minh Trail system beyond the border and the coastal lowlands to the east. Leaving it uncontested meant accepting a permanent enemy presence on the flank. By the spring of 1969, the wider war stood at an uneasy crossroads. American troop levels had peaked and were beginning to decline, but large formations were still fighting major actions in the countryside. Search and destroy operations and body count statistics still shaped strategy, while patience at home was thinning. Each new battle had to produce results that commanders could explain to a skeptical public. Families watched casualty figures on television and wondered what each operation was buying. On paper, taking Hill 937 made military sense. Intelligence suggested a substantial North Vietnamese force was dug in on the ridge, including elements of a seasoned regiment. The hill dominated approaches inside the valley and overlooked movement routes and fire bases below. Removing the defenders promised to disrupt enemy control of the area and deny them a strong point above friendly operations. It also promised to show that American airborne infantry could still seize the ground assigned to it. But the real cost would be measured in more than mud, blood, and shell casings. It would be measured in 10 days of grinding assaults, casualty reports sent home, and arguments in newspapers, hearing rooms, and living rooms far from Vietnam. One jumbo ridge was about to become more than a tactical objective. It was about to become a symbol in the larger debate over why the war was being fought at all. The road to the hill began with a map of the A Shau Valley covered in arrows. In early 1969, American and South Vietnamese commanders launched operations meant to push North Vietnamese forces out of the valley and keep them off balance. One of those efforts, Operation Apache Snow, called for coordinated sweeps by the 101st Airborne Division and South Vietnamese forces across the high ground around the valley. They were looking for base camps, supply caches, and main force units dug into the ridges. At first, Hill 937 did not stand out. On the operations overlay, it was one of many numbered elevations assigned to battalions moving through the area. The 3rd Brigade of the 101st, including the 3rd Battalion, 187 Infantry, was tasked with pushing west from fire bases and probing the slopes for enemy positions. The assumption was that North Vietnamese units would fight delaying actions, then slip across the nearby border into Laos when pressure became too strong. Reality proved different. Patrols near Hill 937 met stronger resistance than expected. Skirmishes revealed bunkers and fighting positions deeper and more carefully built than temporary camps. Captured documents and radio intercepts pointed to elements of a seasoned North Vietnamese regiment dug in on the mountain, known locally as Ap Bia. What had been one objective among many now looked like the center of the enemy defense in that part of the valley. At command posts, the picture emerged in pieces. Commanders weighed the danger of attacking steep, jungle-covered slopes against the danger of leaving a prepared enemy position above friendly movement routes and fire bases. The decision was direct but costly. The hill could not be left in enemy hands. Orders went out to probe, fix, and seize the crest. For the soldiers below, that meant the ridge ahead was now the main fight. The battle unfolded over 10 days of near-continuous contact. American companies climbed through mud, roots, and thick vegetation, encountering layer after layer of defense. Platoons advanced until automatic fire, grenades, and mortars stopped them from bunkers that seemed to rise out of the earth. Each time one position was taken, another opened up higher on the slope. Artillery and airstrikes hit suspected strongpoints, but the jungle canopy and deep bunkers absorbed much of the damage. The hill seemed to soak up fire. For a rifle squad, the mountain became a maze of sudden violence. Men hugged the ground as enemy mortars walked up and down the slopes. Calls for smoke, high explosive, and medevac competed on the radio net. Squad leaders pushed men forward in short rushes, counting on supporting fires to lift at just the right moment. A few meters of progress on the map felt enormous when every step might trigger fire from a slit trench no one had seen. At company and battalion level, the fight became a grim calculation of ground gained against casualties suffered. Commanders shifted attacks to different spurs and approaches, searching for a weakness in the bunker system. One day's assault might focus on a finger of the ridge, while the next sent another company toward a different angle. Aircraft dropped bombs and napalm on coordinates adjusted again and again by forward observers. Each attack built on the battered gains of the last, but the crest still refused to fall. The North Vietnamese defenders held major advantages. Their bunkers were cut into the hillside with logs and earth, often connected by covered trenches that allowed troops to shift under fire. Machine guns swept likely approaches, while snipers and riflemen targeted leaders and radio operators. Sometimes defenders waited until American troops were very close before opening fire. The battle often collapsed into grenades, rifle fire, and close combat rather than long-range firepower. As the days wore on, more American companies joined the fight. Fire bases in the valley fired round after round in support. Helicopters brought ammunition and carried out the wounded, braving weather, smoke, and ground fire. Pilots learned the contours of the hill almost as well as the infantry, knowing where small clearings could be scratched out for a few minutes at a time. The air above the ridge was rarely quiet. Each evening, commanders counted casualties and revised plans. Company and platoon leaders tried to hold their units together as fatigue, rain, mud, and loss wore at morale. By the time troops closed within reach of the crest, Hill 937 had become more than a number. It had become a shared ordeal across multiple battalions. Among the soldiers, the nickname that would outlast the operation had already taken hold. They called it Hamburger Hill. The final turning of the battle did not come from one dramatic charge. It came from hard lessons applied day after day. Commanders studied which approaches had become killing zones and which routes offered even a thin chance of success. Artillery officers and forward air controllers learned the shape of the bunker system. Repeated strikes hit ridgelines and suspected complexes until thick jungle became splintered stumps and churned earth. The destruction did not clear the hill by itself, but it stripped away some of the concealment that had protected the defenders. On the ground, infantry companies reorganized battered platoons and prepared coordinated assaults instead of isolated thrusts. Leaders used bounding movement and tighter control of supporting fire, so one element covered another while artillery lifted at the moment troops advanced. When a bunker was reduced, assaulting soldiers tried to push past it quickly rather than stop on the cleared position. Every gain became a foothold for the next push. In the final phase, multiple battalions converged on the crest in a carefully timed assault. Artillery and airstrikes lifted in sequence, opening short windows for infantry to rush forward. North Vietnamese units, worn down by bombardment and close combat, found their once solid bunker network fractured. Some crews fought nearly to the last man. Others gave way as American troops came from angles earlier attacks had not reached. When soldiers finally stood on the highest ground, they saw broken bunkers, shattered trees, smoke, and men who understood how much the ridge had cost. Tactically, the capture of Hill 937 removed a major enemy strongpoint from the A Shau Valley. It showed that airborne infantry could assault and seize heavily fortified terrain under terrible conditions. In the aftermath, units consolidated positions, cleared remaining bunkers, searched for tunnels and booby traps, and evacuated the wounded. For the soldiers who had climbed the hill, the end felt less like victory than a long exhale. What happened next made Hamburger Hill far larger in memory than many other hard-fought engagements. Within a relatively short time, American units pulled back from the crest as operations shifted and the specific value of holding Hill 937 declined. News reports highlighted the heavy casualties and the decision not to hold the ground permanently. Critics argued that the battle showed a strategy spending lives for terrain that could soon be abandoned. Supporters answered that in a war against an elusive enemy, forcing that enemy to suffer heavy losses and withdraw was meaningful, even if the ground was later vacated.
In public debate, Hamburger Hill became shorthand for larger questions about the war. Congressional hearings and press commentary used the battle to examine how tactical decisions on the ground connected to strategic messages at home. The questions were not only about maps and objectives. They were about casualty figures, battlefield reports, televised images, and public trust. Hill 937 had become a reference point in the argument over whether the cost of an operation matched its purpose.
The controversy fed into a wider policy shift already underway. Senior leaders were moving away from large, American-led search and destroy sweeps that emphasized body counts in remote terrain. The reaction to Hamburger Hill helped accelerate the turn toward placing more of the fighting in South Vietnamese hands and reducing large American offensives in places like the A Shau Valley. A single jungle hillside helped push a national strategy in a new direction. For students of military history, Hamburger Hill remains a stark reminder that tactical success can carry heavy strategic and moral weight. The battle shows how courage and skill at the small unit level can exist alongside hard questions about goals, methods, and public support. Decisions made in one valley can shape debates in distant capitals. The ridge above the A Shau Valley still speaks to how a democracy wages a long war and how it matches the sacrifices asked of soldiers to clear and defensible aims. You can still hear the story of Hamburger Hill as part of narrated Headline Wednesday features in the audio editions produced with Dispatch. For listeners and readers who want to look deeper into United States military history, the series also connects to discussions in a large online community devoted to these campaigns. Headline Wednesday is developed by trackpads.com as part of Dispatch, U.S. Military History Magazine.